Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for the February Weiler Wednesday webinar. I'm Nate Schmidt. I'm the Director of Marketing at Weiler Abrasives, and today I'm joined by Rick Hopkins, our Technical Training Manager, and Elliot Shepard, our Associate Product Manager. Our topic for today is resin fiber discs, and this is the first of a two-part series of webinars on the topic of resin fiber discs. Before we get started, just a quick update on our response to COVID-19. Weiler Abrasives continues to navigate this ever-changing business environment, and our priority remains on the health and safety of our customers, our coworkers, and the communities that we service. We continue to operate all of our manufacturing facilities and distribution centers around the globe, and we're in close contact with our suppliers to ensure we continue to supply our customers with the products that they need to do their jobs every day. Just a quick update on our sales team. We continue to support our customers in the field, and we can do that through a variety of different mediums. As you see on the slide here, we've done a lot of virtual training and product demonstrations, both with our distribution partners as well as with our end users. We've also done on-site abrasives evaluations, and we'd encourage you to reach out to us to help you overcome the challenges that you're having in your facilities, even during these difficult times, and we will certainly follow all of the proper safety protocols as we do that in your facilities. Before we jump into the webinar, some quick Zoom tips. You're probably becoming a professional at this by now, but we have muted all lines to prevent any background noise. We encourage questions throughout the webinar. You can submit those through the Q&A function within Zoom, and we'll answer those questions at the conclusion of today's webinar. And then last but not least, today's webinar will feature demonstrations in our product demonstration lab in our Cresco facility. And the best way to view those is to put Zoom into gallery mode so that you can see the full video of those demonstrations. You can do that on the app by selecting the gallery mode as you see here. And you can also do that if you're in the desktop setting by clicking the view icon in the upper right corner and switching views on your mobile device or on your desktop device. The agenda for today, really want to get into the basics of resin fiber discs and setting yourself up for success. We're going to talk about tips for safety and storage, the key advantages of using a resin fiber disc as opposed to some other abrasives options. We're going to talk about installation and setup, which is critical to a successful resin fiber disc operation. And then lastly, some pro insights on how that setup affects the disc performance. And then again, we'll get to questions and answers at the end of the session. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Rick and Elliot. Take it away, guys.
Okay, thanks, Nate. And again, right, everybody, welcome. I'm Rick Hopkins, and with my friend Elliot Shepard. And today, one of the things that we thought was pretty important to cover was the variety of options that you have at your disposal for resin fiber disc. And again, right, as Nate said, how can I properly care and store and then set these things up to use, right? And Elliot, as a fabricator, you know, there are several reasons why you would use a resin fiber disc, choose a resin fiber disc over another abrasive. But you know, why would you? What was one of the ones that where you would go to a resin fiber disc as your go-to?
So the majority of stuff that we did was mostly weld blending, so it was high-end custom fab. So when you're blending a weld, you want it to disappear completely. You wanted that contact patch that was offered by a resin fiber disc and the ability to control it as much as possible, not to go too far in. You know, so sometimes we're going full mirror polish on some of these products, so we need that surface to be completely flat. And the resin fiber disc was the product that that gave us that ability, right? So that's what we mainly went for.
Yeah, awesome, right? And so, you know, one of the ways that I refer to resin fiber discs is arguably the most aggressive abrasive that you can choose, right? Again, when used optimally and properly. And you know, it gives you, it's an abrasive that gives you the aggression of a belt because you're using that hard substrate, that backing of a pad, but gives you the versatility of a right angle grinder and the reach and the ability to get into different parts at different working angles that would ordinarily not be able to take advantage of the aggression of a belt, right?
Right.
Now, to your point, right, when you're blending, the ability to spread out that contact patch, and the analogy that I always use is that drywall knife, right? When you're trying to hide a seam and you're trying to blend it with a 2-inch drywall knife versus an 8-inch or a 12-inch drywall knife, you know, and as we get into this, we'll describe how you can take advantage and utilize that backing pad in order to truly facilitate that wide blending contact patch that's going to get you to your final finish with fewer passes and faster time.
Yeah, exactly. And so, you know, coming from the fabrication background, I wish I knew what I know now, because the options and the variability with resin fiber disc is great. And we're going to be talking about all of them as we go through here, but just some of the variabilities that you can do to actually enhance the performance of your resin fiber disc. You know, it's really cool to be able to see just with some changes here that we'll speak about. It could really affect the performance of your product.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so before, as we would start any conversation and discussion, right, safety is of the utmost importance. And whether you're talking about your abrasive or you're talking about the tool, it's important that you read, understand, and comply the instructions that come with that abrasive and or tool. And specifically, as we talk about mounting a resin fiber disc or any abrasive, it's vitally important that we make sure that we have an appropriately sized and properly fitted and positioned guard installed on the grinder before we attempt to do any of this. And so yeah, I'd like to give a quick shout out to our friend and our district sales manager down in Georgia and Florida, Tim Hunter, who said, Elliot and Rick, if you're going to talk about resin fiber discs and you don't talk about how to take care of them and how to store them, you'd be missing a significant issue. And it's something that we talk about with customers all the time. And it's pretty vitally important, right? As everybody is probably familiar, resin fiber discs are purchased and bought in a pack that's wrapped pretty tight. And as we use them and cut that pack open and take them out, a resin fiber disc will tend to develop a certain level of curl, again, depending on the environment. So what is this curl? And is curl all bad? Is all lost just because a resin fiber disc curls? And you know, the short answer is no, right? The curl can be in both directions. As you're seeing here, when the disc curves away from the abrasive grain, this is what we'll describe as positive curl, right? And this is occurring in drier environments. So up here in the Northeast, typically humidity, right, particularly now, humidity is relatively low. And as these discs sit out in the ambient air, the moisture will come out of these backing pads. And so the grain and the backing will want to curl away from the grain or down. Now, the interesting thing is a little bit of positive curl is actually favorable as far as installing on your resin fiber disc. And that as you tighten that top disc knot, the disc flattens right out and you actually pull that edge right down firm and tight to the outside edge of that backing pad.
And then Rick, on the opposite end of the spectrum, so you were talking about that positive curl. We have an example of negative curl where you have that resin fiber disc curling towards the abrasive grain. In applying this to a backing pad and adapting that on a right angle grinder is not something you want to do. You want to be able to try and get this back to flat, or if not, to get to that positive curl. Because, Rick, could you hand me that backing pad over there real quick? Just one right there. Perfect. So as you see, when we put it onto a 4.5-inch backing pad, we're not flush with that backing pad. So we could potentially be putting ourselves in some danger by running the product like this. But as Rick is going to show us right here, there is hope for these getting back to normal and being able to run these again.
Yeah, absolutely. So negative curl or curl upwards is a product of really moist or damp environments. So, you know, certainly any super high humidity environment or direct exposure to water can cause your resin fiber disc to want to curl upward and away from the grain or towards the grain. And, you know, as Elliot said, all is not necessarily lost. This resin fiber disc, just 24 hours ago, we had stuck in our humidity chamber and ran the humidity up. And just yesterday, this disc was curled around and into itself as like a burrito. And by just taking it out of that humidity and putting it in my office and letting it sit and come back up to ambient temperature in less than 24 hours, as you can see, it's actually developed a little bit of that positive curl instead of, and basically corrected itself. But how can we take care of it and try to maintain as consistent as possible of an ambient temperature and environment once we open our resin fiber discs? And one of the things that I'll always go to is my trusty Ziploc bag. So once I open up my resin fiber disc, regardless of how often or how frequently I'll use them, I'll just, instead of leaving them sitting in my garage or on my workbench or out in the open air, I'll stick them in a Ziploc bag, try to get as much air as humanly possible out of them, and let them store and stay in that consistent environment. So again, we know that depending on where you live, there's no way for you to control the humidity and the amount of moisture that's in the air, but the ways that we can maintain as consistent an ambient temperature as humanly possible and not subject things to high levels of swings, the better off we are as far as being able to control this amount of curl and be able to get the most performance in life out of any resin fiber disc.
Yeah, and Rick, you know, the first shop I ever worked in, it was not climate controlled. It was 100 and some odd degrees in the summer and 30 some odd degrees in the winter. And we learned that we needed to store those resin fiber discs, and we actually used Tupperware containers just to be able to seal it and let that keep the moisture out and just keep it as constant as possible. And that helped out a lot as well.
Absolutely, right? So there are certainly many different options, right? The Tupperware and that patented burp. Don't forget to burp your container. There are several things that can absolutely help control the moisture, and that's what it's all about, is maintaining consistent temperature throughout. So now, right, we've got it perfectly stored. We're safe. We understand we've got our resin fiber disc. How do we install it, and what do we use it on, right? There are so many different options in backing pads.
And that's the thing is, you know, as a fabricator, I thought there was one option. I thought you just, you know, you got your normal backing pad that came with the product, you know, it was the one that's on the shelf. And until I started doing the job I am now, seeing the myriad of different options, that's the crazy part for me, being able to see the differences, right? So.
Yeah, absolutely, right? And so knowledge is 75% of the battle, right? And understanding what options are available. And the first thing that you're going to consider is buy a resin fiber disc backing pad or get a resin fiber disc backing pad that's appropriately sized for the disc that you're going to use, right? So a general rule of thumb, there should be no less than 3/16 of an inch of overhang of the disc, right? But Elliot, right, and I'm sure you've run into this in many fabrication environments, I want to get some compliancy. I need to get some flexibility and some conformability in my resin fiber disc. So I'm just going to take a 4-inch backing pad or a smaller backing pad, and I'm going to use a smaller diameter backing pad.
Right. So now, once you have that smaller diameter backing pad, you get that conformability, but at a cost, right? There's no structure behind that resin fiber disc to be able to hold it true. I've seen phenolic backs, like flat discs being used, you know, a used up flat disc will be, you know, slap a resin fiber disc on there, put a nut on and run it like that. I've seen them run without backers completely. So, you know, there's from 0 to 100 on the different ways that people have run these. And if you're not using a resin fiber disc backing pad, you're doing it the wrong way.
Right, again, and 9 times out of 10, it's out of the frustration of not understanding that there's a solution that's safe and effective, that it's available to you. And so the main point here is when you need compliance or flexibility in your backing pad, you can buy a softer durometer pad that's going to add and give you the flexibility and ability to grind at higher, steeper grinder angles, while still maintaining that even consistent contact patch with the work surface. As you work up in stiffness to a more medium pad, right, again, a little bit of flexibility, but continuously stiffer, all the way up to an extra stiff that provides almost the rigidity of a hard grinding wheel. And so again, right, as you go up in stiffness, in order to get the most out of your resin fiber disc, you're going to want to use a lower, shallower grinding angle that spreads out that contact patch. Again, remember that drywall knife. The wider we can spread this out, the more cutting knives we have on our work surface, and the better the ability to actually blend and hide that weld seam.
Right, so if you're using a very stiff backer pad, long, flat grinding is great for that vacuum pad. Something like a conformable surface like this tube is perfect for these softer backing pads because it actually wraps around the surface as Rick's demonstrating right here. And then if we throw that extra hard backer on there, you can see there's no conformability whatsoever. So on a flat surface, that's fantastic because I can remove material with a larger contact patch and still achieve a flat, nice grind on my parent material.
Right, smooth and consistent grinding or blending is the name of the game, right? And the main reason that you're going to choose that resin fiber disc, and the stiffer and firmer on contoured parts, the higher possibility you have of subjecting yourself to gouging and undercutting. So as Elliot said, right, softer backing pads for conformability, for compliancy, for parts that have a lot of contours, curves, and an uneven work surface. Higher grinding angles, a little bit steeper grinding angles. Harder, firmer backing pads for lower grinding surfaces, flatter, more consistent grinding surfaces, and higher levels of aggression. So let's talk about now physically installing our backing pad onto our grinder. And one of the things, again, this is where you get back to every single grinder manufacturer has a slightly different style, spindle length, guard orientation. But the first thing that you'll notice directly is that a smaller diameter, 4.5 or 5 inch right angle grinder has a significantly shorter spindle than a 7 inch or a 9 inch right angle grinder, which are generally significantly longer. And so what that means is that as you're installing your resin fiber disc backing pad, it's important that you remove both adapting nuts, but specifically the lower adapting nut that came with your grinder prior to hand tightening that backing pad all the way down. This is something that, again, you're going to install prior to your resin fiber disc and hand tight. There's no reason to use a tool or feel like you need to use a high level of aggression in order to tighten that resin fiber disc on there.
Right, and that makes it that much harder to get off when you need to change it too. So just keep that in mind as well.
Now we're going to take our resin fiber disc, and the next thing we'll point out is the disc nuts that are available and that you may be choosing. Also available in a variety of different sizes, diameters, and depths. And so it's another point that you need to consider as you start to install your resin fiber disc. And before you do, how much spindle and thread do I have exposed? And so how deep do I need my adapting nut? And so with a typical 4.5 inch resin fiber disc, we're gonna use finger pressure to just gradually tighten. And now we'll come in with our disc wrench. As you can see, a resin fiber disc wrench will have shallower and broader stems than a conventional adapting nut wrench. But the difficulty and the challenge is that in order to effectively tighten, you're using significant leverage, and it's difficult to provide the downward pressure directly over that adapting nut, and it can make installation and removal a challenge. And so one of the things that we'll share with some lucky winners at the end of this webinar is a different style adapting nut wrench that allows you to provide that pressure directly down. And again, do not over tighten your resin fiber disc. If you're using the appropriate pressure down and out, this is this is significant or is sufficient for the resin fiber disc, and will make it easier to remove it when you're done without having to use excessive pressure as well.
Yeah, and the beauty of that wrench compared to the other ones where it has the fulcrum where you actually have to wrench down on it is like Rick said, it causes you and it makes you not put that much pressure while you're tightening down. So it keeps it in the back of your mind that you don't want to over tighten these. You want to be able to get them off easily, get them on easily, but finger tight, hand tight, that's all you need for resin fiber disc.
Yeah, so, and just one thing that I like to point out, right? If you're bending your wrench during use, that's a pretty strong indicator that you're using a little bit too much pressure, whether you're installing or trying to remove the disc from the sheet. So now we'll remove the Open Arbor 7/8, and let's Elliot, maybe you can walk through the difference between the installation on that larger diameter grinder with the significantly larger spindle length.
Right, so with this larger spindle, we're going to have to, I know when we spoke about the 4.5-inch grinder, we want to take off the adapting nuts. This one, because the spindle is so long, we want to actually add adapting nuts. So when we add those adapting nuts to that spindle, we're actually bringing that backing pad up and inside this guard, so we're not having a protrusion of the spindle, which could contact our workpiece. So actually hitting that spindle on the workpiece is a bad thing. It can cause an issue. You can mess up those threads and then have it be an issue later on as you're trying to actually put these on. So as of right now, I mean, it looks to me that's a little bit too high. So what I'll actually do is back this pad back off and then add a second adapting nut, just to make sure that I don't have that extra length of spindle outside of that backing pad. So now I'll be able to add on my my RFD to the backer pad. I don't have the spindle extended, so I don't have to worry about contact. And then I'll have enough thread engagement inside of the disc nut to be able to apply pressure and get this attached to that 7 or 9-inch grinder, that larger product. There we go.
The important is, regardless of what size or diameter, right? What we're attempting to do, we're looking to manage and maintain a grinding surface that's below the outside and inside the guard, the circumference of the guard, underneath the outer lip of that guard, without having excessive spindle length extending through the center of the disc.
Right, and I've seen and I've been in some shops where people are grinding so flat with RFD that they're actually grinding down this nut to the point where it's a razor blade, and that's dangerous taking on and putting it on and taking it off. And the other part is you don't want to have to contact this with your workpiece, because you can mar and gouge and kind of just ruin what you've been working on for the whole time anyway.
Yeah, absolutely, right? So again, right, consider that size of your disc nut, right? Consider the height and the adapting nuts and the length of that spindle, and make sure that before you use the product, that you've got your setup at an appropriate height that is well contained within the guard. So before we move on, I just want to, right, we have a question, right? And the first five people to respond to the question will receive a little care package that includes one of our specific resin fiber disc wrenches. And the question is,
so with positive or negative curl, are we basically, it's going to be a true or false question, positive or negative curl, does that mean we have to throw those discs away and we can't use them, basically, right?
Correct. The first five that answer that question correctly will receive a Weiler care package that includes a disc nut, or a disc wrench.
Right.
Yep, and you can go ahead and post your answer in the chat function.
Thank you, Nate. I'm sorry about that.
Yep. No problem.
So, the last point that I want to make before we move into the wrap up and the takeaways, and we can take some questions, is that just like any abrasive or other part, a backing pad will wear over time. And one of the, it's important that you're constantly maintaining and looking for excessive signs of outside wear on the edge or damage if it should be contacting the workpiece or dropped. And these, you know, when you get to a point where you're seeing excessive wear on the grinding surface or a shortening, right, as the diameter starts to change in that backing pad, it's important that you replace it immediately.
One thing, quickly touch on is the 5/8/11 arbor. So a lot of facilities don't know that these actually really exist. So the great part about these is you don't have to worry about the disc nut. And in certain situations, the diameter of that 5/8/11 nut is smaller than some of the disc nuts that are available. So that means on a 7-inch, you have less of a contact possibility and more abrasive grain that can contact your workpiece too. Anything to add on that one?
It's a great point. Thank you. So as we wrap up, right, let's remember that we're going to start with care and storage, right? And the better we take care of our products before use, the better the performance we're going to get during and after use. Our RFDs are going to provide that aggression of a belt with the versatility and ability to manipulate and reach of your right angle grinder. And as Elliot said, right, it's going to give you that blending capability that is, really better than any other abrasive option, right? Arguably, right? Choosing the backing pad based on flexibility and what it is that you're trying to accomplish. Again, right? Softer flexes for steeper grinding angles for parts that are more irregular and have larger contours and variability. Stiffer backing pads for lowering grinding angles, flat and consistent surfaces, and more importantly, long, extremely long grinding and blending seams.
Right. And last but not least, proper installation. Reading these cards that come with the product, and almost just as important, reading the tool information when you purchase a tool and understanding the proper ways to use these tools, and then understanding the proper ways to use the products. And then installing them properly, how we talked about, looking at negative and positive curl, figuring out what's too much, and then getting them back to normal so they're usable again. Anything else to add on that one, Rick?
Well, that's absolutely well said. So, Nate, do you have winners?
Yeah, thanks, Rick. So we do have the winners of the of that nifty little adapting wrench to put the resin fiber disc on. So the 5 folks that answered the question properly, which the answer was that you can use those resin fiber discs, right? You don't have to throw them out. And the winners are Ralph Johnson, Georgia Stewart, Randy Winterhack, Gary Wentz, and Jameson Doan. So the 5 of you will get in touch with you after the webinar and get you that nifty little tool so you can use it with your resin fiber disc applications. Just quick, as far as next steps, we'll be sending a follow-up email after the webinar with a few resources. Everything that we talked about related to the setup of the resin fiber disc, we have in a nifty little checklist. So we'll include that in the email. You can reference that and utilize that to make sure that you have a proper setup with your resin fiber disc. We're also going to include our brochure that outlines our full product offering of resin fiber discs. And then, as I mentioned earlier, this is the first of a 2-part series on resin fiber discs. So the next one will be in March, on March 24th at 2 p.m. And the topic for that one, we will get into maximizing resin fiber disc performance and solving application challenges when using resin fiber discs. We'd encourage you to not wait until March. If you have questions or you need help with your applications, we are always here to support you in the field, over the phone at 800-835-9999, or you can submit a contact us on our website at weilerabrasives.com, and we'd be glad to get you in touch with your local Weiler sales representative to get you some assistance and make sure you're getting the most out of your abrasive products. So with that said, we'll go into some questions. And again, if you have a question, we would ask you to post that in the Q&A function within Zoom. And we'll pose these questions here to Rick and Elliot and get you as many answers as we can. So again, you can post those questions into the Q&A function in Zoom. So we do have a couple questions here, Rick and Elliot. The first one is, what is the benefit to buying a resin fiber disc with the twist-on connector already installed?
Yeah, so I'm assuming when you're talking about the twist-on connector, you're talking about right that 5/8 staked nut. It's a great question, and while sometimes right this will add a little bit of upfront expense, the main benefit is that, as we talked about, it first and foremost it'll minimize the surface area that's involved on the grinding surface of a resin fiber disc by keeping the metal minimal. The second one is there's no need to bother yourself with that disc nut, disc wrench. You're able to just quickly and rapidly drop the disc onto the spindle, and with a few quick twists, you're able to rapidly install it right onto that backing pad and start grinding right out of the box.
All right, great, thank you, Rick. Another one here. We've got resin fiber discs that wear very quickly in our shop, primarily on the outside edge. And sometimes that causes them to tear and become hard to control. Do you have any tips to prevent that?
So, looking at your backing pad, that's going to be a big part. Looking at the durometer and how stiff or soft it is can affect that. For one, making sure you're using the right size backing pad, like we said earlier. Too much overhang can cause it to exactly what you said, where that grain sheds away and kind of runs out before the full life of the disc. I know I'm missing something here, Rick. What else?
Yeah, no, I mean, again, right, it's very difficult to picture and imagine the multitude of possibilities here, but it sounds like it could be a combination of a little bit of undersized backing pad, right to Elliot's point, where you've got excessive overhang on the edge of your disc that's going to gradually wear away. It could also be the angle that you or your folks are grinding at, right? An extremely steep angle is going to focus that aggression and that focus point on a very small area that's going to wear very rapidly and create that wear pattern that's only an 1/8 inch or potentially a 1/4 inch thick on the edge of that resin fiber disc. And again, right, as you said, it's very difficult to predict when that's going to wear out. And what can happen is once that edge wears away, you can start to grab with the edge of your backing pad. So my general advice would be to consider that grinding angle and try to lower that grinding angle and spread out the contact patch a little bit to put more knives on the thing. And what I think you'll find is that in addition to getting a more even wear on your resin fiber disc, you're also going to find that you actually get the job done a little bit quicker.
All right, thanks, guys. One other question here. Do resin fiber discs have an RPM rating like a cutting wheel that we have to be concerned with?
Yeah, 100%. So they will have an RPM rating. They will be, rated on the box. That's what this little card is for, to make sure you check that RPM compared to whatever grinder you're using. So if you're using a 4.5 inch diameter resin fiber disc, you want to make sure you're matching that up with a 4.5 inch right angle grinder. And the right angle grinder will give you your RPM on the side of the product, and you want to make sure we match that. We want to stay below that right angle grinder for your RPMs.
Yeah, the maximum RPMs of a resin fiber disc are going to be identical to the comparably rated flap disc grinding wheel or cutting wheel. So in the 4.5 inch, for example, right, the maximum RPM is going to be around 13,000 as far as safe operation. We all know that a 4.5 inch right angle grinder from any manufacturer is typically rated around 11,000. And that's completely unloaded speeds, right? So under normal operation, those RPMs drop considerably. So a resin fiber disc, should be and will be identified as being, again, in 4.5-inch, 13,000, a 5-inch, about 12,000. And the RPMs, as you know, drop as you get higher in diameter.
Great, thank you. The last question we have right now is just how can I get some help selecting the proper resin fiber disc for my application? And I think we talked about this a little bit earlier. Feel free to add on, guys, if I missed anything. But we are going to send out our resin fiber disc brochure. It will give you some of those tips, but we are always here to support you. And again, we can do that over the phone if you reach out to our customer service team, or we can do a site evaluation and come on site and evaluate your applications, and even make sure that a resin fiber disc is the right abrasive for your application, right? And make sure that you're using the product appropriately to get the most out of it. I don't know, Rick, Elliot, anything to add?
No, that's great, Nate. And as you said, right, the only thing that I would add is that our customer experience team is second to none and always ready, willing, and able to help and assist with any specific question that you have. But you also have your authorized Weiler distributor at your disposal should you have a specific and immediate need too.
Sounds good. Well, that's the last question that we have. Again, I want to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon. And a reminder, come back for part 2, which will be in March. And we look forward to seeing you back here in March. Have a great rest of your day.
Sparks will fly in March.
Awesome. Look forward to it, guys. Thanks again. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.